So when we think about winning teams, really successful teams that we want to model, I often think about what were the things they did to get connected, the team activities. You think about the NBA champions San Antonio Spurs. They ate elaborate meals together. The Messiah College Division III national champions that I talk about in the book The Culture System, they had forced family fun Fridays, right? They had to hang out together every Friday as a team. Or you just watch any famous sports movie, like Remember the Titans, you think about their hardcore summer training camp, right? And I think so often we as coaches, we try to create these for our team. We do the team paintball and the bowling, the hell days, the outdoor adventure trips, or whatever it is. And really what I think we miss in all of this is we're getting caught up. We're too focused on what they do in these team building events. We're looking for the great team activity that's going to build connection and raise accountability and teamwork. In my experience, it's less about what people do together. It's more about them being together. It's not necessarily about the activity. It's just about creating time and space to be with each other. If you read Daniel Coyle's book, The Culture Code, where he discusses the San Antonio Spurs dinners, it wasn't the fancy wine or food that made those dinners special. It was how Greg Popovich would facilitate an environment where time seemed to stop. Meals were very long affairs. When I talked with Dave Brandt on the Coaching Culture podcast, forced family fun Fridays were never about the activity. He really didn't care what they did. He just wanted them to be together. In today's episode of the Coaching Culture podcast, Nate, Betsy, and myself, we're inspired really to talk about team being versus team building, just off the back of the transformational experience that many leaders just went through for our third TOC retreat that we hosted this May. Now, whether you are working to plan a retreat for your team, you want to do some team culture time, or just to be more intentional in your team bus trips, your team dinners, your team meetings that you're already hosting, today is going to give you a much different look at how you can facilitate your team's growth through these everyday experiences. Also, just a quick note, you should hang around for the end of today's podcast because I'm going to share a little bit more information about the TOC retreats we talk about and how you can apply to be a part of these incredibly unique and transformative experiences. Welcome to the Coaching Culture Podcast. My name is JP Nerbun, and I'm joined today by my friends and co-hosts, Nate Sanderson and Betsy Butterrick. The mission of this podcast is to help you to become a better leader and build a better team culture. And I just can't recommend enough being a subscriber to our weekly newsletter, the Team Culture Toolbox. Make sure you're not just subscribed, but it's at the top of your weekly reads, because each week you get a new article, a culture building tip or tool, as well as other culture building resources and the notes to this and every episode of the podcast. You can subscribe at tocculture.com. I'd also highly recommend checking out betsybutterrick.com. Betsy's weekly Substack is one of my favorite reads of the week as well. Well, team, we are here. We made it somehow. We've both just gone through some travels the last few days here. I know Betsy's gone out to Denver. Nate's come back from our retreat in New Jersey, back to Iowa. And I did the red eye last night from Philadelphia to Ireland. So we're coming in here, probably a little bit jet lagged or a little bit tired here, but I'm excited to be here to unpack what I think is a really interesting topic that I don't know if I've ever heard people talk about when it comes to team culture and leadership in the sports space that much. And it's really going to be really around, people often talk about team building. What's great team building? How do what do you do to build the team culture? And we're going to really unpack this idea around just team being, right? Just being together as a team. And it really comes from the experience that myself and Nate just went through these last 4 days on our leadership retreat in the South Jersey Shore, where we had run leadership retreats before. We had gone out to Park City, Utah. We've done 2 before, but this one had a really much different intention from me when organizing this retreat that I kind of expressed to Nate back in February when we kind of committed to doing this. I actually went out to Tuscany last year to attend a leadership retreat of a mentor of mine that he was running, and I went to learn. I went to learn from a very experienced executive coach and facilitator who's done retreats all over the world, largely does them in Tuscany. Just what is he doing in this space? And it really blew my mind. Obviously it's Tuscany, it's great. And the food, the wine, the culture, all these things are great, but that's not what resonated the most with me. What resonated the most was how my mentor Russ could just, he created this space where just time seemed to almost stop for everyone there. Here was 10 people that traveled all across the world, and we were able to be together in ways that was recharging for us. It and at the same time helped us to have new insights into ourselves and into our human experience that I think for many of us there would have said, say kind of like left us forever changed. So I very much inspired from that experience wanted to come in here and create a retreat experience for coaches and leaders, and we had people from all over the US and Canada come in for this, and this was about creating this space for something similar to happen, and it's just slow down time. Let's get there. Let's be together. And this was different than our previous two retreats where probably, Nate and I were focusing more on content. Like, what are we going to teach? What are the concepts we're going to cover? And the amazing thing, those retreats were really well received, but this, this was a very much different experience with, many people saying this was kind of one of the best weekends of their lives. A few people said, so I'll kind of leave it there, throw it to you, Nate, here, because, I told you about this idea of time and space. Like, I'm just focusing on how we create time and space in this retreat experience. And maybe you could kind of share a little bit about maybe what you kind of were thinking as you're kind of headed into that, and then what the experience actually meant for you, and just some of your initial takeaways on that.
Well, JP, I don't know that I gave it a ton of thought, to be honest with you, coming into it, other than I knew that you were taking kind of the planning in a little bit different direction, and obviously having, working together all the time and hearing about your experience in Tuscany and also through just, your own executive coaching experience, that there was just a different intention around everything that we did at this retreat. And that was not just our quote unquote sessions, but even our morning routines and the time off between sessions and what we did with meals. And I think that the two things that probably stick out to me the most in the just reflecting in the last kind of 12 to 24 hours here is that you made a reference while we were there from Tim Galloway's book, The Inner Game of Tennis, essentially about how time almost seemed to stand still, and or maybe we lost an awareness of time. And that was such a unique thing to happen because our time is so dictated by all of the things that have to be done, or all of the demands that are on our time. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It just makes those moments when, I hate to say this, but like even when we were in the ocean, the last morning and we got out and like nobody had any sense of how long we had been in, and it was just, we're just out there together, freezing our giblets off. And, but at the same time, like there was just a freedom in that of just, wandering into lunch and wandering around downtown and not necessarily, um, being subject to the demands of others or tasks on our time. And that is a really unique experience for coaches and for parents, in this kind of busy world that we live in. So that was awesome. And I think a lot of the people, that were there really appreciated that. I think the second piece of that then, like it's one thing to have time, but it's another thing to have space. And the way that we kind of really just coached conversation, both listening and sharing during the weekend in some different ways and from some different perspectives, was a unique experience for most of those who were there. The opportunity to really be listened to deeply, maybe for the first time in a long time, and the opportunity to listen deeply for some, maybe even for the first time, in the way that we were coached to do that, and the way that we created space for that opportunity to happen and to be able to practice that. So those were kind of my perspectives coming away from it, but it was definitely much different than what we had done before. And I think people walked away just blown away with the experience of being that they had.
And Nate, you're talking about time and space, and you mentioned that last morning, being in the ocean and getting out and people having no concept of how long they were in there. And I think that that is a perfect analogy for why it's so important for coaches to create time and space is my experience with so many coaches is they don't realize how long they've been underwater. And we're not talking about like years of experience in the coaching profession. It's just they don't, until they experience something different, until that space is curated for them and held for them, even simply in a conversation where someone is purely listening with curiosity. It's in that moment that they finally realize they've been in the water for so long. And just to witness that awareness, that realization of like, this is different, like this feels restorative. It speaks volumes to the need for this to be part of what we engage in, not just for ourselves, for our growth and development, but for our well-being, so that we can do the work that we're tasked to do.
Yeah, it's incredibly powerful was for me the experience. Like, and here I am, the facilitator, and you would think, you got 12 people coming in from all over the world, right, for this, and I'm the organizer. And yet, what was so powerful there was we were able to, everyone was able to commit together to slow down, be present, and hold space for each other. And people held space for me. And I think it was a much different. Like some might have said, JP, you probably should just get away, you know, go out to the beach by yourself, just chill out, relax. Like some people, I might have thought, hey, that's what I need at this period of my life. I'm really stressed out, and I wasn't actually really super stressed out at the time, but I'm just saying, like, you get to the end of the season as a coach, I just need to get away, just go be myself, go climb a mountain, whatever it be. And yet by others holding space for me, it helped me to slow down as well. It's slowed down time for me. And here I am, supposed to be facilitating a session that last morning, like you mentioned, Nate. And it's just like, I just stopped caring about it starting on time. It's just like, whenever we get out of this ocean, we'll get out of this ocean. So it's a beautiful thing how we've talked about just being, and me and Betsy on a previous episode, like last month, which we'll put in the show notes there, but this is about just being together. And so for me, my big learning in this experience was how others being present and holding space for us, that almost encourages us to slow down, right? When it would have been much more difficult for me to do that by myself. And I think that's a powerful learning for us as coaches when it comes to our own self-care, growth, leadership journey, and then also what we could do for potentially teams that we lead, right?
And you mentioned, JP, about this, like being together. And I think a lot of coaches might say, well, we're together all the time. Like I'm with my team all the time. Like I have a really long season, JP, I'm with them. But there's a difference between being with them with a to-do list, being with them with an agenda, being with them, being in pursuit of something, and truly being with them without those things. And you mentioned you were the facilitator and having the intention of creating time and space, but also that was something that you were encouraged to do. I think a lot of coaches are encouraged to take time and space, but there's a difference between encouragement and then being given permission, where you find yourself in the context of community with others who are also doing the same thing. And then that pressure to keep doing starts to fall away because now the thing to do is to relax into the being, the shared experience. And there's so much that comes up for me here language wise, like the encouragement versus permission, and the doing and being, the way of being together but with the intention of doing versus being together with the intention of simply connecting. These are different things, and it's in those subtleties that we find the restoration, that we find the development, that we find the connection, that I think really is the sustaining force behind what we're asked to do in the profession.
And I think it's really important that, we didn't just pick a really beautiful beach and bring a bunch of coaches together, right? As Nate said, there's a lot of little things that we did to actually create this environment, like from, some front loading with some, reflections that people had to be, we encouraged people to do to kind of set their intention and focus in there. But really it was right off the bat, every time we came together, we did a little mindfulness routine, right? And we weren't doing 20 minutes of mindfulness any of the days. We just, okay, let's just slow down, let's get present. And that varied based upon the intention or focus of that maybe session or that time together. We set group agreements at the beginning of how do we want to be together in this space, and what does that look like for us, and what would be significant about that. Um, and then we actually practiced in some ways. We had to practice like how to listen, how to slow down, how to embrace silence. And I think that became one, especially one coach's or leader's big takeaway at the end was, wow, like silence, right? Like there's just one moment of us sitting in silence together and nobody feeling an awkwardness, a desire to say anything or to do anything. And it felt like we could stay in that moment for like ever. Um, and then the reality was we did have flights to catch and everybody had to make their way out of that. But it just felt like, boy, we could be here just forever. Like time did stop in that moment, but it was within silence. And I think it just comes back to a lot of the things we do with team. It's just filled with activity or filled with talking. The conversations that we're having with players or within our team, there's just constant noise and chatter. And when you slow down and you create that space there, what actually emerges is a deep, deep human connection that I would call love. Right? I felt love. I felt love in that moment, and from within everybody, and it's a beautiful thing.
Nate, as a participant of sorts, in that retreat experience, what did you what did you find from your conversations with others or even for yourself so different or impactful from the way that we typically operate, not only as coaches, but as people? Like what was unique besides the beautiful location, beautiful house, intentional company? Like what was unique about the way that that space felt for you or how you experienced it?
Well, I think one of the things, we talked about the unique feeling of like really focusing on listening. And I think even, I mean, I look back at my own ways that I've tried to teach listening in the past, with leadership classes or what have you. I don't want to say it's superficial sometimes, there's active listening or there's reflective listening or but probably the most challenging thing and maybe the most revealing thing or one of the early activities was just, we're sitting down, we're having a conversation with a coach. But one of the constraints was that you were only allowed to ask questions. So you couldn't reflect, you couldn't interject your own experience, you couldn't connect, you couldn't empathize, you could only ask questions. And that was so hard for so many because so often we're in the habit of interjecting ourselves, into another person's experience. And and not that's not necessarily a bad thing or a wrong thing. Like it's a way to connect, but when you're limited only to really focusing intently on the other person and what they're saying and how they're saying it, what, maybe what themes are emerging in some of their answers to kind of continue to prod them along, it's really, really challenging. And so many of the coaches, in our observations and our debriefs would say, the coach said a certain thing, and then I thought of an experience that I had, which distracted me from listening, even though I knew I couldn't share it because of the rules of the game, and just like the challenge of focusing attention. And I think JP, that was like a 10-minute conversation. It wasn't even, an hour-long thing. But for maybe the first time for many, like, no, there can be none of you in this, and it can only be about the person that you're engaged with. That was a really unique experience. And again, one that we don't do or don't experience very often on either end in our day-to-day coaching life.
This type of experience, and Betsy, you've helped create some of these experiences for others as well. And I know you're currently in a conference that does an amazing job of that as well too. But this creating time and space, getting teams to be together rather than just to go do team building, play paintball, and all that stuff. Like what's the real benefit from your standpoint, for this? Like, why is this a must? For coaches and their teams and leaders and their teams.
Yeah, I think it's a must because one, it's different. And when you do different things, different possibilities arise. So whether you're a coach or you're an athlete, so much of our shared pursuit is action oriented. And so when we create space for being, for slowing down, it's great to go on a retreat. I love a good retreat. And I think that sometimes just changing the environment, changing the location, changing the conversation, changing the order in which we do some of the more routine or rote things, like anytime we interject something different and create a change, there's an opportunity for different things to come forth. And I think teams that are really intentional about exploration, that are very intentional about curiosity, that hold that as a value that's consistent in their interactions, stand to learn a lot more about each other. The more we learn about each other, the more information we have, the better we can navigate shared spaces and shared pursuits. So I think that the value is creating opportunities for things to be different so that we get better quality information, that we create maybe stronger connections, so that when we go back to doing the thing that we're used to doing together in a more familiar way, that we can have a different experience. And I say different so as not to put a label of, good, bad, like stronger, weaker, but just to hold that space for curiosity of like, what could we be together? And how do we facilitate that kind of connection through conversation, through questions, through changing environments. And we talk about external environments, but also our internal environments. That game necessitated because of the constraints that someone be curious and only ask questions, that it's purely about the other person, which, in executive coaching, that's the whole thing. Coaching happens through conversation. It's not ours to say and do, it's ours to ask and help somebody unearth what's true for them or present within them. um, I think when we have constraints of sport, of you've got this amount of time for practice, and you have this number of hours a week that you can do things, and you've got this number of players and these competitions, it's like there's so much constraint in terms of time and space. You have a limited amount of time. There's never enough time to do everything you want to do. There's a limited amount of space to feel like you can play with anything that's not on the agenda. And I think that's the real value is when we look at it differently, when we experience it differently, different things come forward. And now perhaps we're better equipped to have an up-leveled experience.
And so many good things there. Nate, from your perspective, I think you've probably been one of the best at, like, I would say, team building, creating team connection experiences, and the things that you do with teams. I think you go back over the 400 episodes of this podcast, you've got some great ideas, but now you think about this, how does it change your perspective, or what you might, environments that you might create for team connection to be formed?
Well, as Betsy was kind of sharing there, JP, one of the things I jotted down about kind of the power of that exercise, let's just use, this example of I can only ask my partner questions for 10, 15 minutes, what have you, is that it's a permission for the subject, the person that is sharing, to be seen. And I think sometimes there's a hesitancy. I don't care if it's in coaching, if it's in leadership, if it's in a marriage, if it's in a relationship, like there's just part of the way that our nervous systems are conditioned as we grow up to um, sometimes be afraid of being seen, or parts of us being seen, right? And so in some ways, like, just part of the game is it's okay for you to be seen and answer these questions honestly, and they don't have to be polished, and they don't have to be rehearsed, and they don't have to be well thought out. Like, we want to see you, right? And the outcome of that, especially after our last round of conversations on Sunday, um, was that it felt like our coaches, those that were doing the interviewing, not only saw me, I'll use myself as an example, but they helped me to see me better or differently, right? And I think, again, that's, as I think about that, is just such a unique and powerful experience. Are there ways to do that with teammates, on your high school, college teams, where again we're creating some conditions, some constraints here, but really the underlying purpose is for everyone on that team to be seen in some way, and maybe even, again, not necessarily licensing everybody as executive coaches on your team, but just allowing them to provide maybe a little bit different perspective through their questions and through their conversation, as Betsy said. And what could that look like, and what would the value of that be, right? And I think JP, you've messed around with this a little bit in some workshops, in some of your speaking, and are just finding that even in those limited opportunities, it's very powerful. And what would that do if you could find a way to do that rather than, bowling or pizza parties or paintballing, where you're creating a safe place and a beneficial place for players to see each other?
You're talking, Nate, and I'm flashing back to, I think it was 2014. I was coaching at UC San Diego, and this was the first time I'd experienced it when you're talking about, what can we do to create space to see each other? And there's so many validating statements, so many affirming statements that coaches make that I hear players make to each other. The one I'd never heard before that hit me from the moment it was said, and I watched it make a difference to so many players. We were running sprints, and there was a great kid on our team. She was from Georgia, so her nickname was Georgie. And one of those kids that's like not the biggest and the most skilled, but just incredible heart. And you just love this kid. And she was finishing sprints to make her time. And one of our post players was like, I see you, Georgie. And it just, the I see you, I cannot tell you how that resonated. And I think to your point, Nate, that is such a human need to be seen, for somebody to bear witness to our story, our impact, our the fact that we're here doing this thing as a human. Like that simple phrase, I see you. If we did nothing else, nobody has to get an executive coaching certificate, like nobody has to do team building, nobody has to take more time than it takes to say, I see you. That has immense value in so many contexts. Like being seen, yes, it can feel vulnerable. Yes, it can feel risky, but it also is one of the most affirming things I've ever witnessed one human do for another, is to see them as they truly are in that moment.
Yeah, I mean, the cool thing in this environment was we had a 23-year-old female doing a master's degree, all the way up to college coaches, to athletic director, kind of close to retirement, to entrepreneur executive, right? Like, so we had a vast group of people in this environment. And so you might think that, oh boy, that's gonna be tough to bring this group together. And yet I just remember as we're all saying our goodbyes at the end and people are heading out, I just kind of stepped back, and it was just the amount of connections and people that were had built the relationships because, to your point, Betsy, through these moments, people had truly listened to each other, and someone that was 23 could relate to another person in their 60s, and they're still shared human experiences, and seeing that in other people, I think is just really powerful. And that whole I see you, it can be said verbally, just like in that situation there, audibly. Michael Gervais says it a lot. I see you, I see you. I hear him say that a lot, with people in that way. And then it's just also done by just reflecting and really, really, truly listening to some of the stuff that we did within a team. So I think this is the time here where I'd love for us to give coaches a few ideas here around, or even just any leader within their whatever team that they have, because I know we have sports coaches, we've got business leaders, we've got school principals and all that on here. It's just, how do we create this space and time and space for our people, the people in our lives, and I would even say our families, right? If you're a parent and you've got children, this can be some of the most impactful things to do. um, Nate, when you come out of that experience, like what's one thing that you would, or two things that you might say, hey, this would be something that as a coach, I could try out, somebody else could try out?
Well, I think JP, even just adapting some of the common sort of disclosure activities that a lot of teams do, like if you think of the hero hardship, activity, and sometimes we put somebody on the hot seat in the middle, and they just kind of tell a story about somebody that they look up to, or that a highlight or a hardship that they've experienced in their life. But oftentimes that's a one-shot narrative, right? It's a sharing, and then it ends. And I, just thinking about how could you apply this? Like that would be, I think, a value add to say, let's do this in conversation form rather than a presentation or just a sharing in front of the group. Where again, just making up rules, right, for the questions that can be asked. Maybe Betsy gets 5 minutes to share a hardship, and I get 5 minutes to ask questions about that, and I can't say anything, right, other than asking questions. I think another constraint that you had used in some of those conversations was just limiting even the questions that we could ask. So your questions could be limited to best, worst, most, least, right? And just coming up with really good open-ended questions on whatever the topic might be that you give your players for the day. And maybe you do that once every couple of weeks and you shuffle your groups around, and all of a sudden, after 2 or 3 months, players have been mixed together in different groups. You talked about different age levels and different levels of experience. It's great for freshmen to be with seniors and sophomores that don't know juniors, to have to, one, be vulnerable, be asked to be vulnerable, two, asked to listen to somebody that they may not be familiar with. But really, the ultimate goal is that they find that that's okay. And I can only imagine what that would do for, a sense of team if you were able to create that kind of time and space.
Yeah, and I think I love that one you talked about, the hero highlight hardship hope, which is a common activity I've seen other teams do. And I remember Sean Keenan, a former guest on the podcast, high school basketball coach in Minnesota. He actually has something with his seniors. They all sit there, and all the underclassmen just spend 10, 15 minutes just asking them questions about their experience. What do they remember? What was the best part, or the hardest parts, and just, it is this really, really powerful experience for both the senior to really feel seen at the end of their journey. And then it's powerful for obviously other people to take learnings from that experience. I think another thing too on this that is really important when doing any of these types of activities is really set agreements on how you want to be together in that space. And this could come from you, the coach. You could just ask that question like, hey, what do we need in this space right now just to fully slow down, be present with each other, or just to really listen? What would this look like if we were all to be really, really listening well to each other, and just have a conversation around that, maybe come up with some group agreements. I know we did that at the retreat, and people found that to be really important. It can be something that just says, oh yeah, we'll make the assumption that we all know how to be together, but just having that conversation around how do we want to be together can be really, really impactful, as well as incorporating some 2-3 minute mindfulness activity. I know this with some of the teams I'm working with here in Ireland. We do a centering activity, like 3 minutes every practice, every team meeting. And, when you're doing that with, some people that are of their 20s, 30s, or, young adult males that are 19, 20, 19, 20, you go, oh, maybe they might think this is weird or whatever. But once they feel it and once they experience it, they're like, oh yeah, that was good, because you come into practice and you've just been go life, go, 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 go. And all of a sudden it's like, hey, let's all just arrive together. Let's all just come and be together right now. Slow down, check in on your breath, listen to a few sounds, right? Like, just check in on what you're feeling in your body. Just what thoughts are coming up. And when you do that centering activity and people experience that, my experience is that people just want more of it. They don't go, and it might be a little unsettling at first, but it's like, oh, that was actually a valuable use of 2-3 minutes before we started practice or that team meeting. So incorporating some centering activities could be really helpful as well.
Yeah, these are great, and in client work, but also just in the broader context of busy people who have a lot going on in their lives, it can feel really hard to take the time and space to just be or to not do. And I was thinking about yesterday, so I'm here at the We Coach Academy, and I've been a faculty member for 9 years. And part of what I love about this space is there's so much restoration, there's so much community. This is a space for female coaches of all sports, all divisions, to come and be together and have shared experience. And there's fantastic speakers that are part of the curriculum here. And I remember last night I was talking with someone right before a session, and it was a session I was really excited to go to. And the conversation continued, and everyone entered the room. And in my mind, I'm like, I gotta go, I gotta go, I gotta go, I gotta wrap this up because I really want to see this session. It was a panel. And then I remembered a quote. I don't remember who said it, but I remember it being impactful at the time, and it served me well ever since. And the quote says, be here with nowhere else to be. And we often talk about be where your feet are, and that being present. For me, it's the second part, with nowhere else to be. That is the really grounding piece, the invitation to be here with nowhere else to be. And I remember thinking, talking with that person, okay, be here with nowhere else to be. And we ended talking for the next 40 minutes. I totally missed the panel session, but it was such a great conversation. And I'm willing to bet, I haven't asked her, I know her well, I could, but I'm willing to bet that she experienced me listening differently because I wasn't trying to get to a point in the conversation where I could then go to the session that I wanted to see. So, first invitation, be here with nowhere else to be. Try that on, see what it changes or shifts for you. The second one that I wrote down as you were talking, and again, how do we do stuff that's in the vein of what we're already doing? So it's not an additional pull of your time, but allows you to maybe experience what you're doing differently. We've all been told, put your phone down, like be fully present. So invitation is put your phone down when you don't have to. Like, yes, if I'm talking with my kids, I'm going to put my phone down so they know I have their full attention. Level up from that with our littlest, who's 2. I might even get on the floor. So instead of, just talking to her from the height that I usually am, I'm going to go down to her level and have a different conversation. Invitation, put your phone away when you don't have to. So if it's just you in the car and you stop at that stoplight, instead of picking it up to do whatever you're going to do and pass the time, don't pick it up. Just be. Maybe notice everything you can notice in the, 40 seconds before the light changes. Another one for me is do something differently. It's something that you're already doing. So maybe you brush your teeth with your opposite hand. And then maybe to finish brushing your teeth, you go back to your normal hand to make sure you've got proper hygiene, but do things differently, drive a different way to work. Maybe even I think about our kitchen, there's a circle downstairs, so I could go to the kitchen from one direction or another, but I always go the shortest route in the morning to get the coffee. Well, the other day I took the long route, which is probably 4 steps longer, but doing different things creates a different feeling, allows us to have a different awareness or perspective, and then other things follow and cascade from there. And then the last part, you talked about it earlier in the podcast, give yourself permission. Like ask yourself, what do I need permission for? What do I need permission for in order to do? And who has to make it okay? Sometimes it's just us. Like sometimes we have to give ourselves permission to stop doing at the same pace. Sometimes we have to give ourselves permission to have a certain amount of time on our calendar that's not scheduled. Sometimes we have to give ourselves permission to spend the money, to do the retreat, to take the time, to have the conversation, to shut the laptop. Like give yourself permission, but ask first, what do you need permission for? And then who do you really need to ask? Often it's ourselves.
Yeah, there's two things that just you just shared that I think really come back to. Like one is the phone thing. Like you talked earlier today about changing the environment. What a way, simplest way to massively change a team bus trip. Phones away, right? And oftentimes I think we have felt like taking the phones away, we're worried about how our players will respond to that. My experience is more so than ever, this younger generation of players is embraces it. They love it, right? So just changes the environment, right? We're going to go be together. We take away those phones, shifts the environment. And then back to the how we're showing up ourselves. Are we slowing down ourselves? Episode 392, we talk about beyond doing, embracing the power of being leadership. You and I do, Betsy, on that one. And that's a great one to go down more of this. But I think the big thing here is we have to model how to be. And we can do that in our conversations, right? When a player comes into our office or we have that one-on-one, are we being with people in that? It's one simple way to model it. On the retreat, what I found to be very important was that I modeled question asking, modeled reflecting, or modeled listening before we broke out into that activity, right? So that people could see what it looked like. The interesting thing for me was, we did a round where everybody got to get coached in these small groups, and I got to be coached near the end. And I got coached by these, 3 other leaders that were there on the retreat. And one of them afterwards said, I want to go back and be coached now. And I'm like, oh, why is that? He's like, because of the way that you showed up in that environment, to really put yourself out there. And so I share that because when you're doing activities like a hero highlight, hardship, hope, or anything like that with a team where there's questions or activities, like how you show up in that environment. Are you vulnerable? Are you fully present? Are you, opening up? Like you can set the example. If you're afraid on how your players might respond to these type of activities, go show them what that looks like, just to slow down, be present, be open. And I think that's a huge component as well.
Betsy, as you're talking about just putting the phone down when you don't have to. I got to spend an extra 4 hours at the Charlotte airport last night as I was waiting for my flight to get me home. And it was amazing, the vast majority of people that were sitting and waiting were engaged on their phones and on their screens. Like even families are just sitting together, in rows of chairs, and all of their faces are aglow, right? And so I had nothing else to do. So I thought, I'm going to walk and visit every gate in this airport without ever taking my phone out, and just watch and just observe. And so it was just interesting. So I do this lap, and it's like I think I walked 4.5 miles, like visiting all of these gates, and ended up at Chick-fil-A at the end. And I'm standing in line next to this guy. And again, I would have missed this opportunity. And this is a dude that I would never have talked to, like with nothing in common, by whatever you can imagine looks the opposite of me. That's this dude, right? And so we're standing here waiting in line, and he pulls out of his pocket what looks like a chocolate chip cookie that's kind of like half wrapped up. And I caught him, and I just like looked over and I saw him do it, and I said, "What's that?" and he said, "Oh, I got this cookie." I said, "Is this the best cookie you could find in the airport?" And he was like, "No, no, this is from, my buddy gave it to me from Wendy's or something like that." And I said, "I have great respect for a man that carries chocolate chip cookies and is ready whenever needed." And we just, we both had just like a sincere laugh. These two strangers waiting in line in Chick-fil-A. But as we reflected on being, and just being where your feet are, like that gave me like a little moment of joy in this 4 hours suffering in the airport that I never would have had if I was just plugged into the matrix, if I was only on my phone, if I was only consumed by my plight, my situation, me being late, whatever it might be. And it just gave me an awareness of those around me. And sometimes like that's all it takes to open up the world a little bit more, is just a divorce from, as you said, the places that our mind and attention typically goes, and things will emerge that will touch your heart, touch the heart of somebody else, create a human connection that might not have been there. Sometimes that's with your players, sometimes that's with your families, and sometimes that's with dudes in Yankees hats at Chick-fil-A that you never would have had a moment with if you didn't catch them pulling a chocolate chip cookie out of their pocket.
All right, that's it for our conversation. Just a quick note about the TOC retreat. This is a very exclusive and private event for leaders. Our latest retreat had coaches, athletic directors, a sports psychologist, business owners, and entrepreneurs. It's about leadership, not just coaching. It's an opportunity to recharge, connect, and develop the vital leadership skills of deep listening and asking questions while working on yourself. Out of the 12 people we had at our last retreat, 10 of them were clients of mine, people that I've coached or consulted for. However, we are continuing to plan to open up 2 spots for leaders from outside of my clients at all our future retreats. So you can learn more and apply for a spot at the TOC retreat at tocculture.com/retreat. Thanks again for listening to the Coaching Culture Podcast.